Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk a bit about something advanced. And we haven't covered it much in this course, and we definitely will in the next section. But I want to get started with it so that even though it might be new and confusing at first, by the time we get into the next section, we'll come back and review exactly what we're doing. I want to make this app more realistic. In a real-life app, we wouldn't necessarily have these robots written like I have here in robots.js. I've just created this file, but in real life, well, we're not manually entering users. We would use something like an API. And what that means, well, we want, when this website gets loaded, to make a request somewhere out there in the world of the internet and grab these robots from a server. Well, we can actually do that. We have over here something called JSON placeholder. And you don't need to worry too much about it, but they actually have a really nice URL that we can use. And they return what we need, a name, an ID, and a username. The rest of the information, well, we don't really need it. But as you can see, just by typing in this URL, I get this. So using this, we're going to make our app a little bit more realistic. Let's get started. If I close my CSS file, since we don't need them anymore, and let's close the rest of the tabs as well. Looking at this app component, we see that it is what we call a smart component. Unlike the search box or card list that are just pure functions, as you can see here, app.js actually has state, a piece of data that describes our app. And because they have state, we call them smart components. And smart components tend to have this class syntax. Now, in real life, when we start up this app, this robots would actually be an empty array because there's nothing there. We haven't grabbed the users. So most likely, if I save this, robots wouldn't display until I load the website, and then as soon as the website gets loaded, I ask for the users from somewhere over the internet. Somewhere, hopefully, here. So let's do that. React comes with a few other things inside of components that we can use. And they're called life cycle methods. And it looks something like this. Don't get too overwhelmed. These are just methods that we can use in here that comes with React. And they're called lifecycle hooks because what they do is if we run these, it will automatically trigger when this app gets loaded on the website. Let me explain. We see that we have three sections. We have mounting, updating, and unmounting. The way React works is we do something called mounting. When I click refresh here, the app component, this component right here, gets mounted into the document with the ID of root. If we go back to our index.html file, well, our web page is nothing but a div with an ID of root. When we say we mount a component, we're replacing this and adding our entire app. That's mounting. So mounting is the start of the app. Now when mounting, these are the lifecycle hooks that get hit, and they're in order. So the first thing is it checks, hey, does this component have a constructor? Well, does app have a constructor? Yes. Okay, then run this piece of code. Does it have component will mount? No, it doesn't. Then ignore it. Does it have render? Yes, it has render. Run this. Does it have component did mount? No, it doesn't have component did mount. Ignore it. And it just runs through this every time. it also has something called updating, and that is whenever a component changes. For example, when we had the list, well, every time I type something, the card list component gets re-rendered because we have new information. The function receives new inputs. Same with the input component. So again, within those components, if we wanted to, we can add component will receive props, should component update, so on and so forth. And finally, with unmounting is when a component is removed from a page. For example, if we change to a different page here, the component will unmount. The app component will get deleted from the page. These are called lifecycle hooks because they get run every time a component does something, and it comes with React. So you can just put them into your class component, and they'll automatically get triggered. You don't have to worry about calling them. Let me demonstrate this for you. We want to use component didMount, which gets called after render. This says that, yes, the app component is mounted on the web page and it's rendered. That is, it's displaying something. Well, we can do that by saying component did mount. And because this is part of React, notice that I'm not using arrow functions here. Now, within component didMount, I can say console.log check. If I refresh this and open up the console, you'll see that I have check. If I refresh, there you go. That was really quick, but you see that that gets called automatically even though I haven't said anything. Using this, we can do something interesting. Now, when component does mount, I can say this.setState to now have robots to the robots that we get from the JavaScript file. If I do this and save, let's refresh and see what happens. It's really, really fast, but you see that we're getting our robots. I am saying run the constructor with an empty array. Just to show you the order of execution here, if I add a console log and we'll just say 1 here, we'll say 2 here, and we'll just say 3. If I save this and open up the console, I have 1, 3, 2, 3. Let's just check that. We have 1 that runs first, then 3, which is render, then 2, which is component didMount, and then 3 runs again. Actually, let's change this to actual words so that you see better what is actually happening. All right. If we save and refresh, look at that. We have constructor that runs first, then render, then component didMount, just like this order. But we now also have render. Why did render run again? Well, if you remember, we created the constructor, we ran render, and then we updated the state in component didMount. So because we updated the state, every time the state changes, remember, we go to the lifecycle, it's updating, it runs render again. So because it goes from an empty array to a robots list, render gets rerun. And the virtual DOM notices that there's a difference and repaints our web browser to include the robots. Very cool. Knowing what we just did, we can remove this and finally make this more realistic. Instead of using the robots file, I'm actually going to remove this. And in here, I'm going to show you a cool way to grab this list from here. I'm going to copy the link, and I'm going to say fetch, which we'll learn about in the next section. We're just saying make this HTTP request. And fetch receives this. Again, we're just saying go to here, dot then. This is going to receive a response. And this response is, well, this part is a little tricky. You just have to get used to it. .json, we just have to convert the response into, again, something that we'll talk about in the next section. For now, just you can copy and paste this, follow along. We'll come back to this and explain what's happening. And from here, let's add this on a new line so we know exactly what's happening. We'll say .then robots, or we can say users, because in this case, we're getting users. And in here, we can say this set state robots to equal users. And we have to make sure that we return this. Save. Let's see if that works. Look at that. Let's refresh. And you see that little lag? It is now working. So in here, we can actually make this smaller and reduce it to one line. We should remember how to do that. And we see that we're simply updating state after we fetch. So we fetch whatever the users are. We're getting a response. We're doing some magic here with JSON, which we'll talk about later. And then we're getting the users and updating the users with set state. So if I refresh again, if I don't do this, let's say I just here don't do anything and return an empty object, you see that I don't receive the robots. I only receive the robots after I update with these users. How cool is that? All right, that was a lot, and this probably looks pretty scary. To make you feel a little bit more comfortable, because I'm using fetch and there's nothing attached to it, does this mean that it's part of the window object? Let's check. If I open up the console and I do window.fetch, yeah, look at that. Fetch is a method on the window object. It comes with all browsers now. It is a tool for us to make requests to servers. And as you can see, this is a server that returns for us when we do /users, a list of users that we can use, which is perfect for our app. And finally, you're wondering, what if this was really slow? What if this took, I don't know, 5 seconds and we had a whole ton of users? Well, in that case, you can do something like an if statement. If robots.length is 0, in that case, we can return an h1 that says loading. Else, we can just say return this. Again, it's just JavaScript. That's the beauty in React. Oh, and you see how I get robots is not defined because it's this.state.robots. Again, we're referring to the state of the app. And here, if I refresh, let's just say that we're not updating the state, and I'm going to just return an empty object. Well, in that case, I just get loading. Very cool. And this is how you build real apps with React. You have a loading bar that you can just add here, make requests on component did mount, and interact with components. Very cool. You know what? We have ourselves our app. There's one last thing I'm going to show you with React, and you've learned the basics in React. You can take this now to build any app that you want. So one more thing to go, one more little piece to get our React knowledge completed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.